Welcome to Wednesdays with Wightman, planning for successful bond elections.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
Well, we do have a icebreaker for people to share their thoughts on the chat box. So in the chat box, note your school's most effective way to get the message out about your bond issue. I think all of us have been through quite a bit with this past election, and it feels like the election just won't end in some ways. But all of our mailboxes filled up, both email, online, Twitter accounts, Facebook, and certainly our paper mail getting filled up with flyers. We do want to encourage people to ask questions during the presentation, and a good way to start that is using the chat box. So down at the bottom of the screen in the middle, there's a place to enter in questions or responses or thoughts. And we do have an icebreaker with the October snow and candidate mailers that all of us just got deluged with. So please enter in your thoughts about how to get your message out for a successful bond issue. So my name is Greg Monberg. I'm the Director of Architecture for Wednesdays with Wightman. I'm also an accredited learning environment planner with the Associations for Learning Environments, and I serve as the governor for the Indiana-Michigan area. And so in addition to being an architect, heavily involved in the design and planning for school buildings, I'm also a planner, and I think a lot about how spaces can better support education. So thank you all for coming. We have a great lineup of people that are participating today for a town hall for best practices in education. So in these unprecedented times, superintendents face many challenges of which they have never dealt with. This town hall provides a platform for superintendents to learn, become informed, ask questions, and share best practices. So our purpose today is very much about sharing best thoughts and practices. We do want everyone to be involved, so continue to use the chat box. I can see that there's quite a bit of discussion taking place, and thank you all for participating in the chat. So our presentation today is about the best practices for passing a bond. On the panel, we do have part-time superintendent, Dr. Thomas Langdon. And Dr. Langdon, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Certainly, yeah. I've superintendent now for more than 20 years and retired, and then I decided I wanted to get kind of back in the superintendency and went back to my first district as an assistant and mentoring the current principal to take on that role soon. So having a great time doing it and great time helping Wightman to further the message to superintendents about the planning and taking care of kids within their buildings.
Thanks. And our next speaker is Tom Page. Tom, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Tom Page, and for 22 years, I was the communications director for Holland Public Schools in Holland, Michigan. And now I have a communication consultancy helping school districts with all their messaging and campaigns and school elections. Being an old guy, I've done about 150 elections to date, and statewide and state rep, state senate, as well as school elections. So that's what we'll talk about in my section.
Thank you very much. And then finally, Jesse Nelson, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jesse Nelson. I'm a certified public accountant and partner with Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors. We work with school districts on the accounting finance side, bond sale, calculating the millage rate, and putting the financial side of the capital plans together. Just really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon.
All right, thank you very much. So we're going to talk today about planning for successful bond elections. And to start, I wanted to share a little bit about the perspective that Wightman brings to the table about how to pass a bond and what has worked with our clients in the past. So if you click ahead, so there's a model about filling the bucket or lighting the fire. There's a quote that's attributed to William Butler Yeats, that education is not the lighting or not the filling of a bucket, but the lighting of a fire. In the 20th century, very often school planning started and ended with an architect and a superintendent. They talked about facility needs in which you make the building warm, safe, and dry, and you make sure you have enough classrooms, a cafeteria, a main office, and a gym, and meet all the programmatic needs. And very often, school planning ended there. We think in the 21st century to be a next generation facility and really to be able to pass a bond successfully, you need to think about three other things. And those are being student-centered, eliminating unnecessary stress on students and giving students and teachers a choice in how they approach education. You need to react to the needs of a community, what they have indicated is important, and you really need to listen to those needs in order to be able to pass a bond. And then facility actualization is about having a fully integrated facility that meets the needs of students and teachers and parents while keeping them warm, safe, and dry and meeting the programmatic needs. And when you do all that well, you tend to have a very successful plan for moving ahead with the bond. Next slide, George.
Oops.
So we like to look at it as three key steps. First step is defining, and that really engages the community and needs to listen to them and understand what the needs of the facility is. Often in the past, 30 years ago, we didn't go beyond just looking at the facility needs before we talk to the community. And then we take it to step two, which is establishing what the funding is that's available and that can support those needs. And then once we pass the bond, then we can move ahead with step three and build. But if you go to the next slide, this is an example of how we go about community engagement. And it's one of the tools we have in the toolbox. Carl Baxmeyer is one of the planners at Wightman. And in this process, we don't just have everybody call out what they feel is important from their own point of view. One of the unique aspects of this planning process is having one-on-one interviews in which we've literally had a school superintendent sit down with a student or a board president sit down with a parent. And almost every time we've done it, I've heard senior leaders within a school district say that they have heard needs expressed to them for the first time. They may have been in the district for 20 years, but they never heard them before, even if they were said. And it's partly because we require each partner to write down not what they feel is important for the district, but what their partner says. So everyone has to be an active listener and actually record what their partner is saying. And out of that, we start developing what the core needs are that the district needs to address. And this not only creates an aspirational goal to pursue that builds support, but it informs and educates people along the way. And so a critical part of this process is building champions within the community to help lead the bond process. If you go to the next slide. Another aspect of how we go about doing that is breaking them down from one-on-one teams into small groups and have them start articulating what that image is using images and Post-it notes. If you go to the next slide. We also do what, how, why exercise. This is the lobby of a high school that we did end up renovating and successfully passed a bond for. But we asked people, what are the students doing in this space? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it that way? This was a space that was designed to meet the basic life safety needs. So it meets fire code, it has exit signs, it has adequate width, but it doesn't necessarily create a space that's conducive to learning. And it doesn't necessarily reduce stresses on students in between during passing periods. So we may show them an image like this from their own district and then show them an image like this. This also happens to be a high school lobby of a high school in Michigan. But the thought process was very different from what went into the first one. This does meet exit code. It does provide adequate width, but what are students doing in this space? You can see one-on-one instruction and independent learning. You see small group activities. You see technology enriched in space. And when you start showing images of what you have versus what's possible, in a space, it starts opening up people's eyes and they start appreciating what goes into planning a school for the next generation. And by that foundation, you build experts, you build champions, and you build support in the community to be able to pass the bond. Next slide. So we used this very process recently in Berrien Springs, Michigan. They had failed their last 4 or 5 bonds consecutively. And most recently in 2013, they had almost exactly the same scope of work. They had relatively low turnout and weren't able to pass. They only got a third yes votes back in 2013. We teamed with another architecture firm on this, and they had led the 2013 exercise. They had developed renderings of what the project should look like and tried to sell that vision by talking to the superintendent, developing a design, and having really nice renderings and fly arounds and animations. And it failed. It failed 2-to-1 against. In 2018, we took a very different approach. We didn't develop any renderings, any images at all. We instead had one-on-one, small group, large group. We had really in-depth discussions within the community. We had a strong cross-section of the community, including business leaders, religious leaders, community leaders. And it was able to pass with more than 50%. And it was almost the same scope of work. The difference was we had a broad coalition that was created through the process by having leaders throughout the community who were actually listening to each other and really understanding what the community needs were. So next slide. So Tom, we're going to move into Tom's presentation now about the 7 pre-roadmap considerations for passing a bond.
Thanks. I should probably start by pointing out that there are some provisos here. Of course, all politics, all campaigns are local. So any of you viewing this presentation know that I don't know your district. I don't know your people as well as you do. And certainly as you can develop your own roadmap for rolling out your own bond campaign, that is going to be predicated on what you know about your own locality. So what I'm going to run through here are just 7 considerations that you may want to think about as you begin putting together your own roadmap for your area. And typically, many school districts have some difficulty in defining what that choice is. When people go to the ballot box, we just did in November, we've done it before. Typically, we're just going to take a few seconds to make a choice. It's either this or that, it's him or her, or it's this candidate against that candidate. But more importantly, for your bond campaign, you're really trying to define it's this future or that future. You know that better than I do. And once again, an election campaign is not a science. We've heard that phrase, follow the science, follow the science. There's no follow the science here. It's really listening and learning much in the same way in the process that Greg pointed out. And so you have to keep that in mind. There's no science, and you really just want to make sure that your choice is being dropped into in the right way, using the right approach into the right context. Every election has a context that it's living in, and you want to be aware of that. We can go on to the next slide. It's important that you describe for the people in your area, your parents, staff, community members who are going to vote on your bond, that here's how we got here. For many years, we've been serving our community, doing it this way. We had these kind of resources, and now we have a problem. We have an obstacle here, and we need your help in solving it. So you just don't want to jump into your ask. At least that would be my recommendation. You definitely want to have a simple script that has A, B, C. Here's where we were. Here's what our problem is. And boy, folks, it would sure be nice if you would help us overcome this. We can go on to 3. Your considerations for your bond really are divided up into 4 areas. When I work with clients, here are the 4 things that we stress that we must have before we proceed, is that whatever we're proposing in our bond campaign, it really letter A is it must solve a real problem. You know, it has to be very tight. If here's the problem that we want to address, we have to make sure our bond campaign solution addresses that. B, our solution must be reasonable. It really cannot be something that nobody else on the planet has tried this. This is so unique, so wonderful. It really has to be reasonable. And the less reasonable it is, the more people are going to be into the other camp, and it's going to be a hard sell. C, it has to be affordable. And what I mean by affordable, I mean comparatively. Rather than roll out a number, why is the number that you're rolling out, kind of like three little bears, why is this the right number? It's just right because it's not too much, it's not too little. If you find yourself choosing a number that's on the high side, or maybe the absolute most expensive, it's probably a good idea to come up with even a more expensive plan that you can say, we didn't want this more expensive plan, therefore we're opting for our number 2 choice, which is this, and here's why. And also, D, it has to be long-term. So you have to solve a real problem, it has to be reasonable, it has to be comparatively affordable, and it has to be long-term. And by comparatively affordable, I mean directly related to the people that you're asking to pay for it. It's nice that the bank president, it's nice that maybe the richest family in town says it's affordable. That's not necessarily affordable comparatively. Next slide. You have some strategic decisions going in as you create your pre-roadmap. And once again, this varies from region to region, district to district. Number 1 is, what is it you will say and what is it you won't say? So for example, when we passed a $73 million bond in Holland, we took great care to model and pattern ourselves after what Holland Christian, our main competitor, what they did. We praised Holland Christian for being a leader in one-to-one devices, and we could learn from their efficiencies. It was a natural inclination, oh, well, we have to have what Holland Christian has, and Holland Christian has everything because they're richer and don't have our number of free and reduced lunch students and so forth. But no, we determined straight up, we are not going to criticize Holland Christian. We're not going to let the rivalry in our hearts get away from us. We're going to praise Holland Christian and learn from them because we want the whole community to work on our bond. So we knew what we were going to say. We knew what we weren't going to say. We knew what we were going to do, and we knew what we weren't going to do. And we all spelled that out ahead of time. And that's really what the essence of a strategy in my book. So secondly, if we go back a slide, George or Greg.
Sorry.
That's right. I just had one other thing, and you can kind of see another decision you have to make is, are you going to have a campaign where you roll it out like you would at the opening of a new shoe store or restaurant, or are you going to have a conversation that really does have an ebb and flow throughout the course as you lead up to election day? So that's a choice you have to make. If you want it all well planned and timelined and calendarized and all that, that's what I would call a campaign. I just happen to think that in this day and age with peer reviews and word of mouth being so effective, Facebook, of course, is that you really want to have an ongoing conversation. Now we can go on to the next one. That you have 2 opponents that you have to be mindful of. It's not always your adamant no voters that are going to be the biggest thorn in your side. I always find the biggest thorns in my side are, number 1, the people who believe no for now. We are going to vote no, not that we're against kids, not that we don't need these buildings, not that we don't need this. It's just that now we see these problems. We need this information. We need that. So no for now is really the benchmark as you try to monitor the opposition. And the other one, and this is largely internal, I kind of expect people outside of our organization, outside of our school district, to not know what's going on. But number 2 is, heck if I know. We would always have staff members that if their neighbors asked them, they didn't know about the bond, they couldn't answer questions about the bond, they didn't know who to refer people to about the bond, and that's really a problem. So those are the 2 components that you really want to try to beat back: the no for now and the heck if I knows. Those are the 2 that if you hit those 2 hard, you'll be fine. Number 6, messaging is only half the third of the battle. It used to be half. That's I think we kind of see it now as we've just went through this campaign. Your audience, your tribe, your supporters, the people who are backing you are very, very, very important now. And I think we kind of saw that in the presidential. It was very much this tribe versus that tribe, and tribes are important. So the message is only a third of the battle. The other, of course, is your election logistics, which we'll get to in a second. But for your messaging, you want to make sure that your message is not about us. Oh, we have this need. Our district really needs this, but about them. What is it our students need? What is it taxpayers? What is it this community? What is it that makes the most sense? And then you want to make sure that your audience segments are understood. Every community has audience segments, from faith-based to athletic, to theater parents, to non-parents, to seniors, to people who are extremely worried about COVID, to friends of ours who are not worried about COVID one bit. You know, we have these segments, and you really have to try to connect with all of them. And thirdly, and this is almost as important as your request or bond question itself, is who's asking. You know, if somebody's coming up to you and asking for money, you're going to look, who is it that's asking? If you know the person, you trust the person, that person's a part of your family, they're going to have a better chance of getting that request than somebody who's just waltzing in off the street, or somebody who you don't trust at all. And sometimes districts have to be honest about the people doing the asking for them, is who are the most trustworthy, who are the most friendly, who are the most outgoing, and you have to have a tough conversation about that. And then the last slide, number 7, is elections are a numbers game. And the more you stray from wanting to try to convince everybody in the area that this is the best thing, you just have to line up your numbers, be aware of your numbers, and have a clear voter goal that you want to bring home on election day. Now, of course, there's absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, same-day registration. So number 2, the election logistics are shifting. And that is something that you have to be mindful of. So as you're prepping your bond campaign, talking about what your request will be, you also maybe want to connect with the clerks and remember that slide that had election in Berrien Springs in 2018. I can guarantee those same people who run those elections, whatever happened in 2018, there may be some of the same, but it's going to be much different in 2020, much different in 2021 than what it was then. And you need to know the rules of the numbers game that you're going to play. So that's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. We'll now move in kind of to the numbers and just an overview of voter bonds. And again, like I talked before, I work on the bond millage, the bond sale, the capital finance, and the accounting side. And so I thought the first thing that we need to discuss briefly is, what is a Michigan school district voted bond issue? And there's a lot of information on the slide, but if you had 5 minutes with a community member, there's really 2 key things that the community is approving when going to vote for that proposal. And they're really up at the top of the slide. The first thing the community is approving is the not to exceed bond amount. So if your project's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, whatever it is, that number is going to be on that ballot, and it's going to set the ceiling as far as the amount of bonds that can be issued for that proposal. The number 2 item that's going to be in a paragraph right under the number, which is at the top, again, looking at the ballot language, is there's going to be some paragraph describing what the money can be spent for. And what that has is that's going to have the bus purchases, technology, refurbishments, any type of thing that can be used for the bond proceeds. And one thing to keep in mind is, if you don't have that listed in the bond proceeds, then you can't use it for. So when working with your bond attorney and your construction team, you want to make sure that everything you could possibly do with those bonds is included in that ballot language. And then the bonds itself is going to be funded from a bond millage rate that can go up and down every year, and that's going to be calculated by the school district. Then the last thing on this slide, and this has become a very good efficiency and long-term capital planning tool for school districts, is what's known as the multiple bond series option. And so what this is talking about is in one election, if you get your total not to exceed bonds approved, you don't have to immediately go and issue those bonds. So for example, if you got a $20 million bond proposal approved, you could do one bond sale of $10 million in year one, then wait 2 years, do your next $10 million in year three, and that's going to help you reduce your interest expense because you're paying down some of the bonds before another bond comes on, and it's going to maximize your project and also allows for some long-term capital planning. This is a tool I would say the vast majority of our clients are working with, and something to keep in mind then when you're planning your proposal. We can go ahead to the next slide then. There we go. So I thought one thing that'd be really helpful for the group is I always like case studies or seeing examples. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, this is the May 2020 Vicksburg Community Schools bond proposal that just recently passed. And I thought they did a really great job accomplishing two things with their proposal. So if you look in the lower right-hand corner of the green box, their proposal was $41.7 million. And then the proposal is going to be completed in 3 bond series. The first series being in 2020 of 17.5 million, 2022 of 14.5, and then the final series in 2024 of 9.7 million. So they're going to have capital funding coming in for the school district many years in the future, and kind of talking that long-term planning we were talking about. This accomplishes one of those goals and really plays out well when talking to the community. Another big item we want to see on this page is in the green box. You can see a line on the left-hand side called instructional technology. And you see that there's $730,000 budgeted in each bond series. And so now Vicksburg Community Schools knows that $730,000 is going to be coming from each bond sale to cover the Chromebooks, the iPads, keep your technology up to date. And they also know the general fund's not going to have to worry about those expenditures because it's approved in the bond proposal. So I thought this was a nice capital plan that we worked with the district on, and just wanted to show you the examples and what the possibilities are and what some other school districts have done. So if we go to the next page. So then, I'm an exciting numbers guy. I have my spreadsheets. I have numbers that go all over the place. But again, trying to communicate to the community, which we've talked about during this presentation, is much easier to put it into charts. And so if you look at this chart, the black line is the estimated bond millage rate for the proposal. And then the green bars are the existing bond payments, and the yellow or gold bars are the proposed bond payments. And so if a community member has a question, and where's the estimated bond millage rate? How long is this proposal going to be? This is a chart that we use that really does a nice job putting it together. Then towards the middle of the chart, you can kind of see some arrows looking at about 2025 and 2026. And the way the Vicksburg proposal has been set up is that, in 2025, the mill's is 6.6, but you can see the bond payment's going to decrease in 2026. So there's a great opportunity for the community and the school district. If capital funding is not needed, well, then the bond millage rate can just drop to 4.71, and that'll be fine. Or if new capital funding is needed, they could pass a new bond proposal in 2025, kind of fill in that drop off, and they can keep the bond millage rate at 6.6 and still generate more capital improvement funding. And that's always a great opportunity. And one of the things, our perfect goal here at Baker Tilly is, if we can get the capital funding needed for the school district and keep the bond millage rate at 6.6, that's going to be the ideal outcome. So Vicksburg's got a very nice capital improvement plan, and they've also got a nice bond payment plan set up as well. So we can go to the next slide. So then what I also thought would be helpful is, this is just a table showing your normal election dates. And then on the right-hand side kind of has a summary of some key items that happened during the proposal process. So your normal election dates that are going to be available to you during the year are May and August and November. And then one thing to note at the bottom is that a March election date will be available to you in any year of the presidential primary. So in 2020, for example, we had a lot of schools that had voted bond proposals in March because it was a presidential year. And so every 4 years, you're going to have an additional election date available to you. So just keep that in mind as some strategy besides your normal 3 election dates. And let's go to the next slide.
Back
We
one.
jumped ahead too much.
There you go.
Thanks. One last thing before I just finish up on this slide is, ideally, and certainly everyone can jump in, what I see the most of ideally when planning a bond proposal is to be about 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years before the election cycle. And, that way you're not rushed. You get that opportunity to get a lot of that community feedback and a lot of that information Tom talked about earlier. And also you get to run different scenarios on the financial side and the capital planning side. And it's always amazing, how much planning it takes into this. So it can always be condensed, but if you can get started 1.5 years in advance, that would be great. And then on this slide, what I did is I kind of looked at some school bond proposal information, and it's always tough to track it down. So this is the information we have internally, and I don't think it encompasses everything, but it's a great indicator. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at March 2016 through November 20 elections. We're looking at the number of elections and the passage rate. And then on the right-hand side, we have the amount of par amount of bonds that passed and failed in the total. And then again, me, the big numbers guy, I love all that stuff, but I think the chart on the right-hand side does a better job of communicating some of the data. And 2 things really popped out at me when I put this chart together. And the first one is you can see the August election seems to be the least popular. We can get maybe some opinions on the question and answer why that turns out to be. The only exception you're going to see is in the far right-hand corner. And you can see that the August election number is up. And the reason that happened is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had a lot of school districts move off the May 2020 election and delayed to August and November. I know we had at least 4 or 5 clients that made that change. So that's one thing to note where you see that difference. I think the other big thing that we're really seeing is when you look on the far right-hand side of that chart, you see a lot more proposals going out and you see some higher dollar figures. And so we're seeing a lot of capital need that's needed for school districts. And then what's really been nice is if you look at that black line, we had 100% passage rate here in May 2020 and 100% passage rate, which I've seen in the chat box here in November 2020. So we've had some great support from the community, and that's really generating a lot of capital funding opportunities and a lot of great things for school districts. If anyone on the call would like to know, where their bond millage rate is or what capital funding available opportunities may be available, we're happy to do it at no cost just to give someone a preliminary analysis. And if that'd be helpful for your district, just give me a call or shoot me an email and we'd be glad to take a look at it. And that's all I have. And thank you very much for attending this afternoon.
Right. Thank you very much, Jesse. So we do want to open it up for questions. And Tom, I don't know if you have any questions you'd like to start us off with, Tom Langdon, perhaps, but a good one, I think, is the one that was entered in the chat box about the impact of COVID-19 that we just touched on, and whether it's a good time to be going out for a bond election during COVID or not. And it looks like that particularly the May and November bonds did really well for those that went out on the ballot. There was 100% pass rate, but it also looked like the number of people or communities that took bonds out and put them on the ballot was reduced quite a bit too. So it may have been only the ones that were most confident of passage bothered going on the bond, or the ones that were most critical of need. So Jesse, do you have any thoughts on that about why the passage rate was so high and why there was a reduced number? It appeared from like the previous November.
That's a great question. I think one of the things that's really been helping out numbers wise that we've seen over the past elections is property values are going up. Taxable values here in the Lansing area, if a house goes up in the market, it's gone. And when property values are rising, that means your bond millage rate is generating more money and it's providing a lot more opportunity. And so really what that is meaning is that school districts are not having to ask for millage increases. They're doing more zero mill increases, or they're having to ask for smaller increments in the tax base. And so when you're not having to ask for a whole lot of change in the millage rate, plus the economy is going well, I think those two components have really been helping us over the past several years, in getting those things passed.
I do think that the November election, with respect to school districts, allowed the school districts to kind of fly under the radar, in that you had presidential campaigns, you had Senate campaigns, you had all kinds of bigger fish cluttering your mailbox and your Facebook. And I think that most people want to support their schools, want to support their community. But because of the other campaigns, the schools just had, there were no scandals, there were no controversies. I always kind of worry that if it's a February or August campaign, particularly as we get into COVID, is that school districts I think they can win. I just think they are going to have to work quite hard, as we talked about the will do, won't do, will say, won't say, that that the election doesn't turn into mask mandates or pro-Biden, pro-Trump. Just keep it to your school and you'll do fine. But if it becomes something bigger than what it is, that's where schools get in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Also, the thought about August is what's the thought on why it appears so few districts tend to want to put something on the ballot in August?
Well, you'd lose, certainly, at least in other times, you'd always have people traveling. And certainly in West Michigan, mid-Michigan, let's say Houghton Lake area and so forth, you have an influx of people from out of town who are maybe at their cottages. And you really want people for that election, they can change their registration within 30 days voting on your ballot. So I think the turn of spring, typically in May, is just a nice positive time. Winter's over, people are feeling good. Most school districts, 99% of them have had a good school year. People want to reward that. So I think May is certainly much better than August than having to chase people.
One of the questions that came up in the chat box is from Craig. He indicated, I'm interested in understanding the education of various segments. Please define segments and techniques used.
Well, going back to what Greg said in his introduction with listening and learning, let's go after these segments. And once again, every locality is different. But in some cases, and I'll use Holland as an example, my hometown, is that we have a strong Democratic Party, a strong Republican Party. We're kind of a 50-50 urban area of about 55,000 people. So we have to be sensitive to both of those. We have Hope College. We have 5 regional satellites from Grand Valley, Davenport College, GRCC, Grand Rapids Community College, and so on. And we have a strong ISD. So we want to be aware of the CTE and the vocational programs that are going on there. And then as we work our way in, you want to be aware of the your athletic boosters, your band boosters, your STEM parents, your US First Robotics parents, whatever those may be, as well as your Senior Citizen Center. We have a strong Senior Citizen Center here, so you're certainly engaged there. And we have a community called Freedom Village, which is quite well-to-do, but it probably has 600 voters of retired people who are living in very nice apartments and so forth. And that's always a big area. So a segment is whatever you deem it to be, in that it could be your local industrialist, it could be your local tourism bureau, it could be your downtown Main Street shops, and so on. So every segment, a family's a segment. So family by family is what's important to them. And you're just having a conversation to see what kind of pushes their buttons or not as you roll out your request.
You have to remember, in August, you really have a limited amount of passion going to the, as I think Tom alluded to, going into the ballot. So you don't usually have highly contested primary races. So the people that really don't want to pay taxes are going to be galvanized, usually already galvanized to vote no on an issue. If someone really wants to have the bond passed, may not be as high in number as the ones that are typically not going to vote unless they're convinced. So you're going to be looking at a disparity right there when you go into an August election. We were I think you have to hitch your ride to what you do well. Like we did a great job in Walkerville. I am not speaking out of turn, I don't think, because my people stepped up, but we have about 270 kids in our school, but we were doing small school. We were doing about 500 lunches for the community around us. And we were putting those, all the informational stuff right in the bag when we gave it to the family every single week. We were giving positive, comments out. We were asking questions while they drove through and got their weekly meal supply. You hitch what to your best vehicle for success. And we had really great timing in August. So that was, I think, one of it. But also the Facebook and all of that. Sometimes Facebook can get people feel really riled up in the negative sense too, especially if there's not a whole lot to go to the voting booth on, except for one item or two items, usually just one. It'll be the school bond issue that's really important and strikes a nerve with people. So you're kind of working against the current from the beginning.
Tom, if I could kind of just jump in on your flyer real quick that you did in Walkerville. One of the things we did in Walkerville with the flyers that went to the lunches, the flyers that were mailed, we did say, please give us your consideration. And we listed all 7 board members. We listed Tom and we listed the principal. So here were 9 names saying, please give this information your consideration. So beyond just the information, here were 9 people that were really hoping you'd give it a look.
And we also personally addressed each one of those postcards. And that's the personal touch that sometimes people are looking for. And again, that was Tom's idea, which I thought really did, allow people to see this as a personal thing. These are human beings asking for this, not a big institution or bureaucracy. So.
And regarding the segments, the one thing I'd add, we normally would have a planning session with the school board and superintendent to determine what the segments are. And they include all the ones that have been mentioned. We would often invite the Chamber of Commerce or actually do presentations specifically targeting the Chamber of Commerce. Or if there's particularly strong religious groups, like in Berrien Springs, there's Andrews University and there's private schools that compete with the public school. And so we invite them in. And I think that's an important aspect of this. It's easy to pick out who the people who are likely to vote yes. Often it's the boosters, it's the PTA, it's the people who volunteer and are very highly engaged in the district. I think sometimes it's just as important to reach out to the people who are the naysayers, who might be against the project, and really listen and understand why they're against it, or what it would take to make them for it, or what is the core issue for them. And so taking some time to be strategic about not only the people who are likely yes voters, but at least understanding who the no voters are and why they're against it can be just as important.
And working with someone like a Baker Tilly, where Jesse's at, and having them easily show people, through graphics and that kind of thing, where they're going to be going, what's the roadmap going to be after this happens. And I guess I'd be remiss in not mentioning, it's a two-edged sword. If you ask people their opinion and ask what should we do, where should we go, and then after you get the bond passed, you pretty much forget about them. Well, why not have a few meetings with them after the bond is passed? Why not continue the conversation a little bit? I think people will accept that as, it wasn't just them using me to get something done. They still want me to join the conversation. I think that's pivotal in keeping people, going forward, because, our board, I went from a 3,000 student district now down to less than 300. There are different nuances, but everybody wants to feel like they're being listened to, but not just used, And after the fact, our board wants to go for a sinking fund every 5 years. If we're going to do that, we better keep the conversations going and not wait 4.5 years to start it up again.
Absolutely. So are there any other questions? Does anybody else have any topics they'd like to cover? Please go ahead and enter those in the chat box.
Another component, while people are thinking other questions, as we talk about audience segments, is not only who they are and whether they're yes or no, but you want to get ascertain some level of intensity, so that if somebody's really, really, really against you, you certainly want to work with them so that they can't write the paper or call in or make a fuss saying nobody ever talked to them. If you can get them to tone down a bit, at least maybe they're not going to put up a ton of money to try and run a counter campaign to yours. So certainly, as Greg mentioned, the no voters being important, whatever you can do to reach out to them respectfully and listen to them. If you can ratchet down their level of intensity, that is a big, big deal. The intensity of your audience, one way or the other, is a big thing now.
Absolutely. So we do have kind of a recap up on the screen right now. So we had talked quite a bit about whether this is the right time for a bond issue. The good news is that so far during COVID-19, the pass rate has actually been quite high. If you look back for both the May and the November bonds during COVID in 2020, it was a 100% pass rate in both of those elections. And as we've discussed, it's very important to make sure that you engage the community and understand who the yes voters are, who the no voters are, and really engage in that group. And then how you can use the bond series to manage the millage rate over time, so that as Jesse had shown, that as some other bonds may peel off, you may be able to implement new bonds or pass new bonds so that the tax rate stays level, so that you don't necessarily have to have an increase in the tax rate over time in order to best meet the capital expenditures and needs within the community. So if there aren't any other questions, we do want to thank everybody for participating.
I do have a question.
Yes, sure.
Has anybody been noticing that due to districts choosing to go remote, that's been resulting in uptick in negativity toward bond discussions?
Hey, Greg, can I just jump in on that?
Sure.
I don't have any kind of scientific proof one way or the other, but just anecdotal conversations with many parents of school-age children. You know, I asked the question, you know, if the school came and asked you to support a bond to improve their schools with your kids not having been in school for, you know, almost a year now, would you support that? And many parents that I've spoken with that have school-age children say, yes, absolutely, because we want to get them back in those schools. And if it has anything to do with safety, I would support it 100%. Again, not scientific, but just anecdotal.
If I could piggyback, that's a great point, George. If I could piggyback and say, if you see the studies coming out right now, they're really indicating that masks and social distancing are not nearly as effective as ventilation, proper ventilation in a building. In fact, Spectrum Health sent that word out about a week and a half ago that, you know, we have to do something about that. Now, you can open a window if you want to. I'm not sure how great that's going to be in mid-February. So those are things that we have to let the public know some of those things that are going to be, they're deleterious to our kids. Probably poor ventilation, because you're looking at the droplets being not taken care of through ventilation, not droplets, but, you know, the tiny, tiny, tiny vapor pretty much are not going to be taken care of without proper ventilation. And that's going to be a message we have to send to our parents, those kind of things, and make sure they understand it and back it up with real science. So I think that can be positive as well. But, you know, one of the biggest if you're looking at the 45 to 55 who just don't know if they want to say yes or no, uncertainty can be a big problem. And that's what we have to kind of overcome. But I think George is right. In people's hearts, they want to help their kids, but the message has to be crystalline.
And the who's asking makes a difference there too, because I think, let's say, for example, on the slide, you see, this is the right time to plan a bond issue. Well, it's always the right time to plan, but just like a household, there's no right time for me to have to replace a furnace or replace a roof. So I think if we lean into the household and say, we know may not be the right time, but we need the roof, we need this, we need the ventilation system. And certainly I think the question that Craig had about remote, I think parents are a little distressed and a little anxious about the whole remote thing, but certainly leaning into the remote. We hear you on the remote, but we're working like crazy to get back together again. And while we're doing remote, maybe now is the time to address these things so they're addressed when we come back as best we can. So I think leaning in with the anxiety and what people's hopes and fears are will get you a longer way than trying to wordsmith your way around it, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, Greg, for whatever reason, we can't hear you.
Thank you. It's one of our discussion topics is, in fact, changing infrastructure to provide new HVAC that will provide additional protection for our students.
Yeah, Craig, I'm kind of jumping the gun here a little bit, but in December, we're going to have a specialist on that is going to talk about indoor air quality and sustainability. Just a quick vignette here. I don't know that anybody's aware of this, but our maintenance people that are in our schools, there has been no guidelines up until, I believe, June of this year on how to use your PPP in order to change filters. Think about that, air filters, like HEPA filters. They would just go in there, spend an entire day in a school removing old air filters, putting new ones in. I mean, that's a breeding ground of germs and viruses. And then he's also going to talk about how to go from HEPA filters to ionizers and other technologies in order to be able to clean out as many of the viruses and pollutants in our indoor air, not only for schools, but also for, work environments. Greg, I think you're up.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
We can. Yes. Thank you.
Excellent. So I was just adding on to that point about fear and hope. Those are two of the most powerful motivators in any election, that parents want the very best for their kids. And so providing what the hope is, what is the positive outcome for improving student performance, for improving educational outcomes, that's a big motivator, but certainly fear is as well. And if you have a thorough analysis of your facilities and you understand the impact that building envelope that's aging so that the roof is not keeping the water out and you have water damage, you are really putting at risk the health and safety of the students, and you're also putting at risk the investment the community has made in that facility, that it's going to be much more costly to repair and maintain. And so there are some things that are more critical than others in keeping the school open, certainly roofs, keeping the water out of the building, keeping it weather tight, warm, safe, and dry is critical. Certainly making sure a boiler doesn't go down in February so that you can keep the building open is a very critical one. And if you know that the time is up on those things, that can be a powerful motivator to getting people to understand the critical nature of getting the bond passed and addressing those needs. So as George pointed out, that will be part of the core discussion in December. We'll have another Wednesdays with Wightman coming up on December 16th. We will have a couple of speakers, particularly Douglas Lefevre, who specializes in issues like indoor air quality and energy use in buildings and making sure that buildings operate efficiently and optimally. And while reducing cost, but also improving the learning environment for students because of the indoor air quality issues that Dr. Langdon brought up. So we invite you all to come back on December 16th, but thank you very much. And we will be following up with a recording as well as all the slides. We are going to email those out. So everybody will have the contact information for each of the speakers today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. But Tom Page and Jesse Nelson, thank you both for participating today, and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
Right.
Tom. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. So until next time, thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.